Oh, I know that face.
As people start to sign on to our event today, I will just tell you that we'll be getting started in just a couple of moments. We'll give people a moment or two to sign on. We're just opening up the admittance now, so people are coming into the event. And this is the first installment of the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce 2021 Federal Candidate Forums. So we'll be getting underway in just a couple of moments. As you come in, we are going to be recording this event. So I'm going to suggest that people might want to turn off their camera so that we'll capture the recording of our guest speaker rather than all of our guest cameras across the top. Well, I think we're going to get underway. Good afternoon and welcome to the first installment of the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce 2021 Federal Candidate Forums. I want to let you know that the session today is being recorded and it's going to be posted on our website later this week. We'd also like to thank Rogers for recording the series. Each session is going to air on Rogers TV, Channel 10 in Fredericton at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. the day following the recording. And all four are going to run twice consecutively on this coming Saturday, beginning at 1 p.m. and again at 6. So you can check out their website for full details. Thanks again to Rogers for that. So my name is Krista Ross. I'm CEO of the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce. And for the next 4 days, we are going to be virtually hosting one of the candidates in the Fredericton riding each day. You can still register, by the way, for the other forums on our website, and a link is going to be put in the chat box for you to see. We truly appreciate the participation of the candidates. We know their schedules are very busy from morning until night, especially this week as we approach Election Day next Monday. So kicking off our series today is Andrea Johnson, candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. After I introduce Andrea, she's going to provide some opening comments and we're going to follow that with a Q&A. We have had some of our members submit questions in advance and we're also going to take questions from the chat box and we're going to do our best to get through as many questions as possible in the hour that we have today. Please note that only Andrea and I will have our mics unmuted during the forum. So we will ask if you have questions to put them in the chat. So on to the introduction. Andrea is a business professional with more than 20 years of business development experience, with 10 of those in economic development. She has recruited more than 30 international companies and delivered almost 2,000 full-time jobs to New Brunswick during her career with the provincial government. She knows what it takes to sell New Brunswick. She was born in Hamilton, Ontario. She moved at the age of 6 to Harvey Station and lived there until moving into the big city of Fredericton to go to university. Andrea is mom to 4 amazing adults, ages 20 through 23, and she enjoys spending quality time with her partner, Roy. She volunteers her time as a coach for the Capital Region Special Olympics softball team, and she's the executive director of the PC Party of New Brunswick. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to Andrea, and I'll be back in just a little while to ask some questions.
Thank you, Krista, and thank you everyone for joining today. It is my privilege to be here. I'm really appreciative of the Chamber and Krista and her team of putting such an important forum forward for potential voters to be able to get a hear from their candidates. I mean, Krista, you did most of my introduction for me. There is, from a personal and professional basis, you covered it all. I will highlight, one of the common questions that I get constantly from media or at the doors are, why are you running? And, there's three main reasons for me in this riding why I'm running. And they're three very relevant and personal and passionate reasons for me. For one, it's healthcare and mental health. That's my number one priority for our riding. It's something that we've seen deteriorate over the last 6 years. We've seen, mental health be separate from our healthcare system instead of being treated as the health issue that it is. Mental health and healthcare is something that's very, very important to me and my family, and it's something that I will actively push to ensure that we have the support and the resources that we need in this riding. As we've seen, through COVID, we're on the brink. The other two, one is right in my wheelhouse, jobs, economic development. That's, to me, if you are physically and mentally able to go to work, I believe for you, the best social program is a job. We need, I'm a firm believer of a rising tide lifts all ships. And so through job creation and economic recovery, that is one way that we will help combat our deficit and get Canadians back to work and get our economy moving forward. And the third is affordable housing. I mean, we see it here in this riding. I live on the north side. I live in Devon, and we have a very large tent city behind Devon Lumber, and we have another one towards Nashwaak-Sis area, both on the north side of the riding. This is not okay, and it's been happening, and it's been getting worse. We need action, and we need action now. So those are the three main focuses for me for our riding priorities, and those three are the three number one reasons why I am running again this time. So that's all I have for my introduction. So I'll hand it back over to you, Krista. I could read your lips, but.
Sorry, I wasn't able to get my microphone unmuted. Thanks very much for your opening comments, Andrea. I'm going to start with some questions that some of our members have sent in advance. What is the Conservative Party's plan with respect to Serb or enhanced EI? Some employers seem to feel that the program gives a disincentive to work or a disincentive to return to work, and it provides a financial burden to the taxpayers at the same time.
Well, I mean, we know, like, the funding and the support that happened on the front end of this pandemic was something that, Aaron O'Toole and our caucus fully supported. We needed to be there for New Brunswickers and for Canadians when the pandemic and the lockdown hit. And that was great. That was what your government is supposed to do. But as the economy has been reopening, especially here in New Brunswick and the majority of Atlantic Canada, what I'm hearing at the doors is the exact opposite. Companies, small business, as everyone knows, is the absolute backbone of our economy. And hundreds of doors, I'm talking to small business owners all over this riding that are saying, I made it through COVID just by the skin of my teeth. The people are back, the crowds are back, and I can't hire anyone. We have 35,000 more people on EI right now in a worker shortage. So we need to slowly, as the economy reopens and more and more Canadians are getting vaccinated, we need to slowly start to transition off of that emergency benefit and start to get Canadians back to work. Some of those things that we have within our platform is, I'm just trying to go through. There's so much on the workforce piece. So one of the things that we know that we've got people that have been on EI or on the emergency benefit for over 6 months. So you have a gap like that in your resume, that tends to be, I mean, I've been there and recruited hundreds in my past as well. And having a gap usually can be a red flag to some employers. So one of the things that we're instituting is the ability to pay up to 50% of the salary for new hires that have been unemployed for more than 6 months. That encourages businesses to look at those folks first, which will again bring more people up out of and off of EI where they are now. The reality is that we need to look at how are we getting Main Street back on track. And like I said, we've got the supports for the employers, we've got retraining. We're focusing a lot on innovation support, and as well for the apprenticeship programs, training for those folks, immediate access to training for those folks that are laid off currently. So we know that we need an accelerated plan to get New Brunswickers and people in this riding back to work. We also know that, from a country perspective or from a sector perspective, there are still folks that are needing that emergency benefit. So we need to slowly transition them responsibly and balanced off of that program and give them the skills and resources to get back into the workforce. That will help move our economy forward faster than anything else.
Thank you. Appreciate that response. And it leads into the next question. What specific measures will you enact to assist and support New Brunswick tourism industry and help them get back on their feet, the hardest hit industries? How do you intend to support tourism and the hardest hit?
Well, I know there's actually significant pieces in our platform on the tourism side, and that's reinvigorating the tourism industry, making it more appealing for Frederictonians, for New Brunswickers, for people outside of New Brunswick to want to come to New Brunswick, highlighting rural tourism spots, having there's a tax break on local purchases to help support, invigorate the influx of tourism back into this industry. I'm just gonna grab it really quick because it's a really exciting problem to have. The fact that we have so much detail in our platform, it's exciting, but it's also, there's 146 pages and I haven't committed all to memory. But on the tourism side, it's looking at those industries, and again on the resource side, having that training and the support for that training, the resources for folks that need to be retrained in these areas. There's low interest loans for individuals so that they can decide the type of training that they need, and reskilling, again, on the apprenticeship side. If we want to skip, I know you don't want to skip that question, but I will come back to it because I know there are specifics in our platform. I'm just struggling to find it right now.
Why don't I jump to the next question then?
Yeah.
Given the exponential increase in health costs as people age, do you think federal health transfers should be weighted to account for older provinces like New Brunswick?
I think there's a lot that needs to happen with how healthcare is funded in provinces like New Brunswick. We have the most aging population and we have the highest incidence of diabetes in the country. So we have, a very unhealthy population in a lot of cases. And we have a healthcare transfer system that, as you can see, anyone that's been to the ER, anyone that's tried to get access to health services without waiting 6, 8, 12, 18 months in some instances, it's not working. And it hasn't been working. The provinces in Atlantic Canada have been asking our current Liberal government for years to increase those healthcare transfers. And if you look at the population model that it is based on now, no, it's not cutting it. If you look at how many people in New Brunswick, we have a higher need for health services on a per person basis, and that absolutely needs to be addressed. We've committed to essentially within the first 100 days, working with every individual province to understand what their needs are. So that conversation would happen here in New Brunswick within the first 100 days of us forming government. And our biggest commitment on the healthcare side is essentially doubling the healthcare transfers that are coming into New Brunswick, and 6% year over year. And that is something that the provinces have been asking for. A lot of them have asked for 5%. Our premier here has said our needs are even more unique than the rest of Canada. We need 6, and that's what we're committing to. So yes, I don't think the current funding model works, and we've been severely underfunded for far too long.
So some of our businesses would suggest that we're not just underfunded in that area, but with regards to R&D funding. New Brunswick receives about 43% less R&D funding from the federal government versus the national average. Should the government seek to close this gap in the next mandate? And if so, how?
You know, this was during my time with the province, this was one of the issues that came up a lot, and primarily because my sectors of focus were in the IT space. And one of the things that we found, you know, if you look at the SHRED, or the scientific research and development funding that you referenced, we don't take advantage of it. It doesn't work. If it is a large chunk of that funding actually doesn't go to the individual businesses themselves, it ends up going to the consultants that you've had to hire to try to manage through this system. And I've looked at it. I mean, I've worked with companies that have said, listen, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting right here in SHRED credits. And the answer I always got was, yeah, well, we can't figure it out. We can't, it's cumbersome. There's too much red tape. It's ridiculous. So when a large part of that bucket is going to the consultants and not to the company, then the system doesn't work. So, and the fact that we've received 43% less, I mean, it's something that I have been extremely frustrated with for a long time, because I've seen businesses not be able to succeed, or not be able to succeed to their full extent because of bureaucratic red tape. And this is an example. I think a review, and in our platform, we talked about it, there'd be a review of all of these programs. For SHRED, move that out of the CRA and put it into oh my goodness, what's the other? I'm losing all my jargon here this morning. And move it over into, well, out of CRA for one. That's the first review that would need to happen, and move it over into how way IRAP performs now. Streamline the process, look at what doesn't work, review all of the funding programs today. And this is a prime example of something that does not work for New Brunswick businesses. If it did, we would be tapping into it more, and it's not usable, it's not feasible, and it needs to be reworked and overhauled. And that is a commitment in our platform.
So another way that businesses can be supported is to work on getting rid of interprovincial trade barriers. What would you like to see the federal government remove, or work with the provinces to remove specifically?
There's not a lot of specific. It's something that we know that right now we are not taking advantage of our interprovincial trade. And the fact that, again, that there are barriers that prevent that, well, there's your first clue that it's not working. And I guess for me, my struggle is why do we keep trying to push things through that don't work? Why are we not removing these barriers? So the interprovincial trade, that is one that we've talked about a lot. As far as specific policies or specific areas, I don't really have anything right now. But one of the things that's missing from a lot of these programs are key performance indicators. What are we looking at? How are we measuring the success to that? And I think that's a big missing piece in this equation as well.
Our next question is about housing. So if elected, how will your government work with the provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to address housing affordability? Would you implement a national housing roundtable with all levels of government to address the housing challenges facing Canadians? Or what do you think we should do?
The housing issue and the lack of affordable housing is a multi-tiered problem. I mean, we have within that housing issue crisis that we're in, starting from worst to, the most pressing issue right now is, our homelessness again. So a rising tide lifts all ships. We need to look at the key issues. For one, start from scratch and look at, why do we have a homelessness issue? Well, in my opinion, I've said it 100 times, we don't have a homelessness issue. We have a mental health crisis that's been ignored for far too long. And because of that, we now have a homelessness issue. Then we have, my kids are, you've said they're 20, 21, 22, and 24. 2 are in university, 2 are working. They all have roommates. They can't afford the rent in our city. Every door I'm talking to, people are saying the same thing. They're worried about their own kids when they get out. Are they ever going to be able to afford a mortgage? And that's the issue is, again, multi-tiered. First is addressing the homelessness issue on the mental health side. We're also going to invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential drug treatment beds and build 50 recovery community centers across the country. Where do we have for these folks that need these dire resources? Where do they go? Well, we know where they're going. They're going to a tent in behind Devon Lumber, and that's not okay. So again, we're going to invest $325 million over the next 3 years. We're also going to support innovative approaches to address the crisis of mental health challenges and addiction, such as land-based programs developed and managed by Indigenous communities as part of a plan to enhance the diversity of culturally appropriate addiction treatments and prevention services. We also need to look at reworking the federal government's substance abuse policy framework and make sure that recovery is the overarching goal. So that's, to me, that's kind of your first tier, the most pressing tier. And then we need to re-implement the housing first approach, which has been watered down over the last few years. We need to leverage federal infrastructure investments to increase housing supply. So we're committing to building a million homes over the next, I think it's 5 years, 3 years, 5 years. 3 years, there it is, I just found it. To swiftly increase supply, we will implement a plan to build 1 million homes in the next 3 years. To do so, we're going to leverage federal infrastructure investments to increase housing supply, and we will focus on building public transit infrastructure that connects homes and jobs by bringing public transit to where people are buying their homes. I mean, we see it here. This riding is a prime example. It's extremely as equally rural as it is urban. And so some folks, they shouldn't have to leave where they're at, try to find a new place to live close to work because they don't have the transportation ability to get into their job. So bringing those to where people are buying houses is a big piece as well. And looking at, the biggest real estate owner in this country is the federal government. Part of what's laid out in our platform is to look at the thousands and thousands of assets that the federal government owns currently and look at what percentage of those can we peel off. We've committed to 15% of those existing facilities to help build up that the supply of affordable housing.
So you've touched on a lot of areas in that answer, but I want to zero in on something that touches a little more. First of all, how do you intend to support first-time home buyers or new Canadians across the country that are struggling to find housing and resources to meet their needs? And would you look at relaxing mortgage stress tests or restoring the 30-year insured mortgages? And I would say too that oftentimes those first-time home buyers or newcomer home buyers might also be buying in areas that you refer to as not being serviced by public transit because they are perhaps in an outlying area that is a little more affordable. So what will you do to help those first-time home buyers and new Canadian home buyers and mortgage stress tests and potentially restoring the 30-year mortgages?
Yeah, I mean, the mortgage stress test is something that is addressed in our platform specifically. And by reworking that, that helps new homeowners and business owners as well. So one of the things that we've looked at is encourage a new market in 7 to 10-year mortgages to provide stability for both first-time home buyers and lenders, opening another secure path for home ownership for Canadians and reducing the need for the mortgage stress test. We would remove the requirement to conduct a stress test when a homeowner renews a mortgage with another lender, instead of only when staying with their current lender, as is the case today. And this will increase competition, which we know competition helps the market, the consumer market, and help homeowners access more affordable options. Another area, we're going to increase the limit on eligibility for mortgage insurance and index it to home price inflation, allowing those in high-priced real estate markets, like, I mean, I guess to the rest of the world, they may not think that we are, but in our world, this is where we are at right now. In those high-priced real estate markets with less than a 20% down payment and opportunity at home ownership. I mean, I look at my own self, and I remember when I bought my first home, my kids were, yeah, I guess all three. We didn't buy our first home until the 3 kids were born. And then it's like, okay, well, how do you do that? How do you save? Well, looking at removing these requirements, fixing the mortgage stress test to stop discriminating against small business owners and contractors and other non-permanent employees. And we know that by removing the barriers that help people, removing barriers that are preventing people from getting ahead is not good policy. So we need to make sure that we are clearing the way for new homeowners, first-time homeowners, for young families to be able to look after themselves. And we know that when we remove those barriers on the front end, that people are a lot more self-sufficient and on the back end. So those are a few of the issues with the mortgages on the stress test that we would address.
So our next question, it's about 2 or 3 questions rolled into one. So listen
Well, that's
carefully.
usually how I answer questions, so this should be fine.
So first of all, what actions are you advocating to address climate change, and how do you plan to reduce carbon emissions in the next 5 to 10 years while at the same time keeping the economy healthy? And how would you advocate to help business and communities adapt to the changing climate? And the add-on to that question would be, do you think provinces like New Brunswick that are more rural and have fewer ways to mitigate fossil fuel use, like public transit, should there be policies such as the Clean Fuel Standard tailored for us rather than a national one-size-fits-all?
Well, I think regionally, I think we should have more autonomy to make these policy decisions. You know, as individuals, Canadians are contributing to carbon emissions at a faster rate than a lot of other companies, but a lot of that we can't control. We can't control that we have winter. We can't control that I may live in Minto but work in Fredericton. You know, these things we can't control, yet we know that they contribute to the overall our carbon footprint. So we're going to finalize and improve the clean fuel regulations to reduce carbon emissions from every liter of gas and other liquid fuels we burn, turning them into a low carbon fuel standard. So we would follow the British Columbia's policy to achieve a 20% reduction in carbon intensity for transport fuels. We also know that one of the things that is not been working, or we don't see, is how the carbon tax, the way it works now. So being able to finding that balance of not punishing people because it's -40 and I have to have my heat on, and how do you balance that with what opportunities can I do to help make my home greener, my footprint greener, all that good stuff. So we would look at implementing the price that you pay on carbon would go into your own account, where that you can draw from to help with energy efficiencies within your home. Maybe purchase a bicycle so that you can get to work greener, or be able to look at what are ways that I can reduce my carbon footprint as an individual. I mean, big picture, Canada does not we don't contribute, we contribute about 1.6% to the overall global emissions, but individually we're not doing enough as individuals. And so what this does, this incentive program, what it'll do is it'll actually highlight, unlike, and I always make jokes about when my power bill comes and it has, what you produce compared to your neighbor. And every time I look at that, I'm like, there's no way. And so I never really focused on that because I knew I wasn't producing anymore. I was, at one point during that time, I was living alone. My kids had all moved out. So I know I'm not producing more than my next door neighbor. But by having this program in place, what it does is it brings that accountability back to the individual. It's transparent. They can see what they're contributing, how and whether they can be able to say, ooh, geez, like this is where I'm at. And it's transparent and it's in your face. And I believe personal accountability in a lot of ways is the first plan of action. So this kind of incorporates personal accountability, but also it gives you the opportunity to be able to make those greener changes for your environment, for your home, for your living, and help reduce your carbon footprint.
I feel like you hit all of the questions that I asked. And I did have people private messaging me, telling me that that was not 2 questions. It was more like 6. So apologies for that, but you did answer all of them, I believe. And if you didn't, I'm sure have people letting me know that. The next question is actually about entrepreneurial immigrants. So New Brunswick has a low retention rate for entrepreneurial immigrants. Understanding that the province leads the immigration file for New Brunswick, how would you, if elected our MP, work with the province to ensure that we are supporting immigrant investors?
This is, again, I mean, going back to my economic development days, this was a key piece of almost every file that I worked, looking at how do we streamline that process so that it works, and not just works in terms of being able to get people here quicker, it works in terms of retention, to your question. So we know, first of all, that we cannot move forward until we clear the gigantic backlog that exists today. One of the ways that we're going to do that is by creating an efficiency mechanism. So for those waiting for their applications to be reviewed, like one of my volunteers, she's door knocking for me. She's from Germany. When the pandemic hit, her PR process stopped. She's been here for quite a few years now, 6 years, 7 years. She's been contributing, she works. And then when COVID hit, there was no backup plan. Everything stopped. And so she called me at one point, and she was like, she received a letter saying she was going to be deported if she didn't finish the paperwork. But on her end, she couldn't, because those people that she needed were not there. The offices were closed and the backlog was too great. So one of the things that we need to do before we move forward is clear that backlog out. That would, what we're recommending, or what we're committing to, would be you can pay a fee for expedited processing. So this is not, keep in mind, this is on the immigration side, not on, on the refugee side, which Obviously, that's not something that we would put on them, but from the immigration side, these are folks that are coming in to contribute to our economy. And so by having a two-tiered system on that end, for those that can afford to pay to expedite, then they can pay to expedite it. Then that funding comes in for those fees, come back right into the same system so that they can hire more people to get that backlog cleared. Like I can't even recall the number because it was ridiculous where we're at. So until that plan is implemented on the front end, then we can't even look to see how we can make additions on the back end. But one of the other things that we've talked about in our platform is, and this has been a huge issue again in my professional experience, is the credentialing recognition system. We know that there are key areas in key gaps in our in industry now where we can't get people. We know healthcare is a huge one. We know on the cyber side, we've been hearing for years, the last 5 years, that we're going to have like close to 100,000 people shortage just on the cyber side as we continue to move into this more digital world. So we need to address that. Well, actually, we needed to have been addressing it long before now, because now we are at the worker shortage piece. So we need to streamline that process. We need to make sure that the backlog is cleared, and we need to make sure that we're being strategic about the sectors that people are coming into. And then when they get here, we need to make sure that they can actually go to work, because that's why they're coming. They're coming here to make a new life for themselves, and our system is not set up to get them into the workplace in a timely manner.
So one of the areas of immigration that we didn't address, or you didn't address in that answer, was with regards to international students. And it particularly relates to gaining work experience and making connections in their local community. Our chamber has worked on this file extensively. There's a couple of policies we've advocated for, and I'm interested in your opinion on whether you would support them. Changes that would qualifying for the summer jobs program and this student work placement program, participating in voluntary co-op work co-op terms and internships without having to obtain a separate work permit. And the third one, allowing international students to work more than 20 hours per week off campus on a permanent basis, which is currently actually a temporary COVID measure. Those are things that would perhaps establish newcomers to our community who have already started putting down roots, and we could do more to keep them here. So what is your position on those three issues that the chamber's advocated on?
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, like I said, this is a space that I've worked in extensively. These programs that you've talked about they're working. You know, the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, it's working. We know that when we can connect a newcomer with a business and foster that you know, in that environment, we know that they stay longer. So if that program is working, we see the success. Absolutely. Having the fact that we've implemented on the student side that they can work up to 20 hours a week because of COVID. Well, I guess I just don't understand. If we could do it because of COVID, then why wouldn't we just open it up? I mean, we know that it works. We know that by giving our newcomers more opportunity and more availability for success, then they're going to stay. They're going to put down roots. They're going to want to bring their families over, and they're going to successfully contribute to our economy. You know, if again, like I'm a huge proponent of, if something works, then we need to replicate that. And if something doesn't work, if bureaucracy is the reason that we don't have success with certain programs, then why do we have them? That's the part for me that's always been frustrating. If it doesn't work, get rid of it. These programs work. We need to continue to support, and we need to bolster them.
Well, we will send along to you our recommendations for how the programs need to change to work even better.
Perfect.
One of the other parties, I'm going to switch to another topic. Circling back around to homeowners, one of the other parties' platforms states that it will introduce a home buyer's bill of rights and it will ban blind bidding. What discussion has your party had regarding this?
Well, I mean, that's something that I don't disagree with, regardless of which party it's in their platform. And I'm a huge believer of good policy sometimes is absolutely just good policy. And seeing the real estate market with that example, I mean, what's happening with folks is that they're bidding and they're not getting it. They're bidding and they're not getting it. And now they're getting down to the crunch time, and they're being forced in order to not be homeless to bid on a house with no conditions. Well, that's not okay. That's not okay at all. I mean, you know, I can't imagine being one of those families. You get forced into this situation because of the market, because of lack of supply. And then what happens is now you realize that your foundation is messed, or your heating system, or your roof. And then what? Again, you're not any farther ahead. So I'm not sure which party that was, but that is something that I would support, because again, it's just good common sense. One of the things in our platform that we've addressed kind of on a more global scale is eliminating foreign ownership. If you do not plan on living in it yourself, then you don't get to buy it. And that's one of the things that we've seen. I mean, we do see the trickle down effect. You know, people say, they've said to me, well, that only happens in Toronto and that only happens in Vancouver. Well, yeah, it does. It happens by the billions in these large cities. Foreign ownership is driving up the cost, and they have no plan on living in these homes. It's just a way to launder money. And it is a huge problem. So when people say, well, we're in New Brunswick, that's not really the case here. I beg to differ. How many families, what has our population increased by since COVID of families coming from outside of New Brunswick into New Brunswick, buying homes unseen, you know, uninspected? Because at the end of the day, they'll pay $350,000 for a home here, because that same home where they're moving from is $1 million. So we can't say that impact we don't feel here. We absolutely do. I see it every day, and it breaks my heart when I hear someone say, oh, well, you know, I just sold my house for $75,000 over asking. And then I think to myself, well, what happens to that guy that just bought your house, that in a few years from now is going to have a mortgage for $75,000 more than that house is worth? Now what's he going to do? You're in a pickle. So it's we do have a few things in our platform to address the rising costs, that being one of them. But I absolutely support the other suggestion, as well as the unseen bids.
I want to talk a bit about fiscal planning. And this is a three-part question, and it really is only three for anybody counting. What is your party's plan for pandemic spending in the short term? What federal support do you think will be needed for economic recovery in the medium term? And following that, how will you manage the growing debt and deficit in the long term?
Well, so, I mean, you know, I said it earlier, spending to protect Canadians during the pandemic was absolutely the right thing to do, and we supported it. But we can't pass unsustainable debt on to future generations. And now that we are in recovery mode, we need to get spending under control. So we need to wind down emergency COVID support programs in a responsible way as Canadians are vaccinated and the economy continues to reopen. We need to ensure that stimulus measures are targeted and time limited to avoid creating a structural deficit, which is what we see now. And we need to get the economy growing again after years and years of slow growth under the Liberals, so that we have the revenue to pay for the government services that Canadians rely on. So part 2 and 3 of your question, one of the things, we look at deficit soared to $354 billion in 2020, 2021. And I know that seems very daunting, but it's much easier to develop a road back to balance when we consider the three components of this deficit. So there was 30 billion of pre-existing deficit, the amount by which spending exceeds revenues in a normal economy, growing at 1.6%. So the other piece, 70 billion from automatic stabilizers, government revenues drop due to the recession, and 250 billion in COVID emergency government in emergency spending. So, and that includes 80 billion for Serb, 82.3 billion for the wage subsidy, GST, Canada Child Benefit top-ups, funding for provinces, and there's 70 other spending measures. So when you break it down, some of that goes away as the economy continues to reopen. But the biggest focus on our economic road to recovery is on jobs. As we implement our jobs plan, we will get Canadians back to work, meaning lower unemployment, higher tax revenues for the government. And as we do so, again, we'll also wind down the emergency spending, but in a responsible way. So our plan for secure jobs and economic growth, if you look at that part of our platform, those plans together will reduce the deficit by almost 90%. Our economy is what will drive us forward and what will reduce the deficit. If we're not working, we're not reducing the deficit. If we're not mentally well, we're not working and we're not reducing the deficit. If we're not physically well, we're not working and we're not reducing the deficit. So there's, you can see for me, that's big reason why those are my three key areas. We need to get our economy back to work for those that physically and mentally can. And that's when people are working and paying their taxes, that's what we're not a poor country, right? We're Canada. We are a very sustainable, rich country. We need to get our spending under control and allocated to ways that is going to stimulate the economy. And a big part of that is through our job growth plan.
You talk about getting people back to work, and obviously a very important issue for a Chamber of Commerce is the workforce. We have over 1,000 members of our organization, both businesses and not-for-profits in the Greater Fredericton region. So I want to ask, with many people that are continuing to work virtually, downtowns actually across the country are struggling to recover from the pandemic and from public health restrictions. So what role can the federal government play to help ensure economic viability of our downtowns?
Well, we actually do, I think I've mentioned it earlier, we have a Rebuild Main Street plan. So we will launch our Canada Job Surge Plan along with our Rebuilding Main Street plan. So how that works is we know that we need to, and I think I talked about it earlier, getting New Brunswickers back to work means that we need to wind down the benefits that they are currently receiving and then help them with the resources that they need to go back to work. So part of that, again, like I said earlier, is we would implement a plan to cover those salaries up to 50% of those salaries. If you've been out of work for 6 months, that will again encourage businesses to hire those people first. And then we need to look at on the skills gap side. So there's a multi-pronged approach. We're also looking at, there's a Rebuilding Main Street tax credit. So this is providing a 25% tax credit on amounts of up to $100,000 that Canadians personally invest in a small business over the next 2 years. This part, I mean, for a lot of people, they may think, well, it's not really exciting. But for me, coming from, working in the startup space in New Brunswick and working in the IT space, I think of this, and I think this is a huge opportunity for a lot of our startups. We struggle, a lot of our startups struggle with funding because we are in, New Brunswick and Fredericton, and access to capital is a lot easier in the bigger cities. But by being able to, so now there's an incentive for me personally to invest in you in your business. So that's one of the pieces that we're looking at. We're also looking at the Canadian Investment Accelerator. One of our commitments is getting companies spending more and creating jobs by providing a 5% investment tax credit for any capital investment made in 2022 and 2023, with the first $25,000 to be refundable for small business. We're also looking at Main Street business loans. So providing loans up to $200,000 to help small and medium business in hospitality, retail, and tourism get back on their feet, with up to 25% of that being forgiven. Like, that's huge. You know, a lot of our companies, it's, well, you know, as what do they say, the average Canadian is $200 away from insolvency at any point. Well, after the pandemic, our small businesses are a lot of them are in the same position that we are as Canadians. So we need to look at how do we balance the support business, supporting our people, and getting them back to work, because again, a rising tide lifts all ships. So that's the three pieces for rebuilding Main Street for me on the from our commitments from our platform. I think there was another part to that question that I missed though.
I'll circle back around. I just want to have a quick question about that $200,000 loan that would be 25%, I think you said, forgivable.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be open to retail, tourism, hospitality, all of those
Yes.
types of businesses?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. The hardest hit sectors need the most support right now, for sure.
So the first question actually was also about getting people back into our businesses and, you know, trying to, I guess, support that consumer confidence. And if people are still working remotely, working at home, they're not working in the downtowns, they're not in the office buildings, they're not in the federal government offices, let's say, mm-hmm. Or, you know, some other types of businesses that are deciding to work remotely. So what do we do to counteract that?
Telecommunications is a federal jurisdiction, full stop. I mean, we saw during COVID that people are disproportionately disadvantaged right out of the gate because of where they live and because of access to the internet. I mean, access to a reliable internet in 2021 is absolutely a right. I mean, we look at the kids that were sent home. How many families already potentially in a, you know, from a marginalized community or low income, they're already have more obstacles in front of them than the next guy. And then we throw the pandemic on top and said, oh, hey, guess what? Now we're going to throw more obstacles in your way because you can't afford internet or you can't afford to live in the city. So you have to live outside the city, which means you don't have internet. I mean, you drive from here to Harvey, where I'm from, and for the majority of the Hanwell, you don't have internet. Well, like, it's a federal jurisdiction. And the promises that have been made year after year, election after election, I think this is the third that I've heard this promise from our government federally, and it's not happened. And the last of it, like I said, was just stripped off when COVID hit. I mean, you can't hide the fact that we had thousands of people physically unable to go to work because they do not have access to the internet. Like, it should not be a thing in 2021 in New Brunswick.
I have two more questions I'm going to ask you. We've got 7 minutes left. So I'm going to leave it up to you how long or how short you want those answers to be, because I'm also going to give you the last word. So I will give you two quick questions and then let you speak before I close the event. So the first one is, it actually relates to the last one about people working remotely. Also, we think that having the high quality of life that we have here in New Brunswick, we have an opportunity to attract remote workers from across the globe. So what can the federal government do to leverage that opportunity and enhance it for our region?
Well, I mean, I think a majority of what my last answer is would apply to this one And I mean, I've knocked, oh gosh, I don't even know how many doors that I personally have knocked, probably over 3,500 at this point in the last 3.5 weeks. And I'm talking to these people. They did just move here from somewhere else because they can work remotely. Now, mind you, these people are in our, what I would call our city core, in order to have access to that internet. But that is why they are coming here. The number one reason that I'm hearing why they may not stay here is healthcare. That's it's, you think about like what do young families need, or people that want to, it comes down to healthcare. They're going to move here because they can work remotely. We were highlighted on the international stage during COVID, and people looked and went, wait a minute, there's this place called, what's it called? New Brunswick. What is that? Oh, New Brunswick. Never heard of it. And now all of a sudden people have heard of us, and now they're coming here. And then when I see that, and when I talk to them, like, oh, welcome, this is exciting. So happy that you moved. And they're like, yeah, but my neighbor said he's been waiting 3 years for a doctor. And I think to myself, 3? He's doing well, to be honest. And, and how sad is that? So I know we're probably thinking the answer to that is more, I don't even know. It's not any more complicated than our healthcare system needs to significantly improve, or we're not going to keep the people that have moved here. We're not even going to keep the people that have lived here, because healthcare, it's the biggest crisis that we're facing right now.
So I guess this question would touch on that a little bit. This is my final question to you. With the Atlantic immigration pilot becoming permanent now, do you think it should be expanded? And can New Brunswick settle more newcomers than it currently is?
Yes, I was reading about that recently, and absolutely it should be expanded. I mean, the success rate speaks for itself of that program. And I mean, I can't even recall, I'm just looking at all my multiple pages of notes that I have here. And I think it was like, correct me if I'm wrong, 94% success rate of that program, Krista, the Atlantic.
I'm going to have to look that up and get back to you.
I know that when I read the number, I was like, wow, like that's incredible. And so, yes, here's a prime example of a program that was initiated as a pilot. It's good policy. It's working. When something is working and it makes sense, then we need to replicate that, or we need to bolster it. So my answer to part 1 and 2 of that question is yes and yes.
Okay. So with about 3 minutes remaining, I'd like you to talk for maybe 2.5, and then I'll thank you. So your thank you will be as long as you leave me to thank you at the end.
Well, I know sometimes it seems that I ramble, but when it comes down to it, I won't probably take the 2 minutes, but I want to thank everyone for their time, and for the privilege of being able to speak to each of you, and for the ones that have joined to be that connected to our electoral process. I mean, it's very encouraging when people want to know, who are you? For me, like I said, I'll reiterate what I said on my opening. There's a lot of things that I'm passionate about in this province, and the 3 top ones happen to be what I feel are our 3 biggest needs in this region. And I mean, it hits to my personal experience and my professional experience. We can have more of the same. I mean, we're at a point now that there is not a lot of unknown. I mean, we know where we're at. We know the challenges that we have been facing. We know the issues that we're still talking about, 2 and 3 election cycles later, like the internet issue, access to reliable internet. The fact that this is still not a thing is so frustrating. And so I guess, in closing, I want to say thank you everyone for your time. I am asking that you vote for change, that you vote to secure our future, and that on September 20th or any time in between, that you cast your ballot for me, and my commitment to this riding, to this province, and to each and every one of you is that I will work harder than anyone else on every one of these issues, because there is no other alternative. There is no more hurry up and wait. There is no more, well, let's just wait and see. There's no more, well, let's get a group together and try to come up with a plan or a committee. There's no time for any of those things anymore. There's time for one thing, and it's time for change. And that's what I'm asking for. So thank you so much. Thank you, Krista. And I really appreciated our hour, and I can't believe it went so quickly.
Thank you, Andrea, for your time today, for your presentation. A reminder that Andrea is the candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. And I'll also remind you that this is the first in a series of 4 of our federal election candidate forums. And tomorrow we will have Nicole O'Byrne from the Green Party. On Wednesday, September 15th, we'll have Sean Oldenburg from the NDP Party. And on Thursday, September 16th, we will have Jenica Atwin from the Liberal Party. All of the events will take place virtually at 1 p.m. And as mentioned before, they will also be shared on our social media and through Rogers. So we'd like to thank all of you for attending. Thank you again to Andrea, and thanks to our partners at Rogers for televising today's event to be shown at a later time. Thank you very much, and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.